I mean, don't get me wrong. There's about 100 million things that you could ask me where I don't have an answer because it's out of my area of expertise. On the topic of doing my very best to live an extraordinary life, it's something that I think about all the time. Related to that, and maybe even bigger, is the first question in Das Café am Rande der Welt. Why am I here? Like, what is the point of the human experience? Is something that I reflect on and think about for a lot of my minutes. And I have been thinking about for many, many years. And so, again, plenty of things that I know nothing about that I would not have an answer to. But on these types of topics, I find that if I allow myself to step back from it for a second, tap into my intuition, reflect on my life experiences, I usually have a perspective. I'm not saying that the answer that I give is the answer or the right answer for everyone. Very few things in life have just one right answer. But I always say to people that while it may not be the right answer for everyone, I can guarantee you that if I offer it up, it's something that I've thought about a lot.
Welcome to the Female Leadership Podcast. My name is Vera Strauch, and in today's episode, I have the pleasure and the honor to interview a very special guest. John Strelecky is best-selling author and very well known for his books The Big Five for Life or Im Café am Rande der Welt. He's also as close as it comes to being a resident on the show because it's the fourth time that I get to interview him here today on the Female Leadership Podcast. And I have been speaking to John regularly over the past years. Our paths did cross not only via this podcast and of course his books, but also through friends. And every conversation with John is not only an easy flow and feels just very accepting and present, but also the topics are deep and not shy to ask big questions, to look at connections and to become personal. And I remember the first time meeting John, that was back in 2019, and it was very early on in my podcasting days. I was super nervous and excited, and when reflecting on it today, I can see how the way that we talk, I can see a transition in myself, but also in the way that the conversation flows, while the energy is somehow unique. And I really like that. I love the energy that comes with this podcast and with the guests. It's very different and depending on the guest, but still it's something I cherish a lot, and I hope, and I'm very confident to say that with this conversation it will reach you as a listener, and I am very much looking forward to sharing this conversation with you, especially since John's work, but also the conversations we had also about parenthood, life goals, how to tackle challenges in life have impacted me and the work, and I am very happy to share this with you. John is very well known for helping people finding their path in life, living their best life, that's what he says. And in this conversation we spoke about his personal messages, questions that he asks himself. We spoke about big topics of our time, being overwhelmed, losing hope, maybe feeling sad and down, feeling like a prisoner in the life that you build, and the questions of how to find your way out of this, how to become hopeful, where to find guidance, how to give yourself guidance, and how to always tap back into this potential of our intuition that we all carry with us, and that although it's hard to scientifically grasp, is something that is very important to acknowledge, and I for myself also know to work with, because ignoring it is not a good idea. And about that and many more things John and I spoke. It's a personal and also very actionable and very concrete, specific, tactical, but also deeply energizing and kind interview, and I'm happy to share it with you. Enjoy this conversation with John Strelecky, and then let's dive right in. Welcome to the Female Leadership Podcast. My name is Vera Strauch, and in today's episode I have the pleasure and the honor to interview a very special guest. John Strelecky is best-selling author and very well known for his books, The Big Five for Life or Im Café am Rande der Welt. He's also as close as it comes to being a resident on this show. I think it's the fourth interview today. And I mean, John and I, we have been speaking regularly over the past years, and our paths did cross by this podcast, but also, and of course, via your books, but also through friends. And every conversation is not just an easy flow and feels like it feels very accepting and present, but also deep and not shy to ask the big questions and to look at connections and become personal. And I remember our first meeting. It was in Hamburg, 2019. And it was very early in my podcasting days, and I was very nervous and excited. I think it was the first English speaking episode ever. And when reflecting on it today, I can see how the interviews and the excitement has shifted or transformed. And we had conversations about life goals and meaning, but also about parenthood. And I learned a lot. I became a parent. And I very much look forward to this conversation and some of the unusual questions, also from this podcast community, in times that are unsettling and where I think a lot of people, including me, are looking for ways to find guidance in ourselves, but of course also in connections to other people. And I mean, you're a perfect person to talk to. And yeah, so after 5 years, since first meeting John, I am very much looking forward to talking about things that really move us, and that's what John has been doing. Speaks a lot about authenticity, and over the years, there have been, I think, many personal messages and questions from readers. And in his new book, Zeit für Fragen im Café am Rande der Welt, John answers a lot of these questions and at the same time offers inspiration for the readers to what ask yourself in life and how to give yourself guidance. And this is where this conversation will also lead. And I am very excited talking about, the surprises, what life has to offer us, but also, of course, the challenges and how we can, be the how to take ownership of what we can do. And so I'm looking forward to that. And let's dive right in. John, well, long introduction. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vera. So great to see you. And I do distinctly remember that podcast that we did, the very first one, because you had like a little ring light and you had the whole setup that you brought with you. Yeah. And it's amazing how technology has evolved over the years too. And so that was kind of the cutting edge entrepreneurial way to do it at that time. And then now, as I think post-pandemic, and then of course, as your success grows with your show, the next thing you know, everyone's got a studio and their setup looks different. And the quality of the audio is like so much better than it used to be back when we used to do these things in 2019. But I think the energy is the same. The goal is the same, which is to try and make a positive difference in the lives of others. And so looking forward to our conversation. And thank you again for having me on the show.
It's so great to have you. And I mean, I really enjoyed reading through the questions that people ask you and the variety of what I think, at least I could connect to, I think, every one of them.
Awesome.
And so in the last years, which questions did you get to ask yourself? Maybe were there maybe questions where you struggled to find the answer? Something particular that comes to mind?
Absolutely. And just to set context, so these questions that are the basis of Zeit für Fragen were questions that had been submitted by fans over years. And I noticed I would respond. I'd get the question via Instagram or via email, and I would write out an answer, typically a very long answer, and then I would send it. And then I would get another question. And often there were patterns. I started to see, a lot of people are asking about how do I find more happiness in my life, or people were asking about how to deal with stress and anxiety and finding ways to navigate that as part of their existence. And so finally, at some point, it just dawned on me, wait, if so many people are asking these questions and I'm already taking the time to write out the answers, wouldn't it make more sense if I actually
Mhm.
just wrote them all together and put them in a book? And so it was really the fans asking questions that was the genesis of it. And 100%, to answer your question, as I was going through it, the questions that really hit me, I think in terms of my youth in particular, like the ones that I struggled with the most were how to be more courageous and less afraid. That was something that I really, really had a hard time with when I was going through 18, 20, or early 20s for sure. And then how can I understand and deal with fears was another one that, and I think the two go hand in hand because
Mhm.
the lack of comfort in my own skin, the lack of courage, then everything was fearful. I was, concerned that everything was a danger around the next corner. And then I would say as the decades progressed for me, the types of things that I dealt with changed. And I would say the ones that were more relevant to the last couple of 15 years or so of my life would be how do I deal with life when I feel sad or down?
Mhm.
It's interesting. You'd think that as you get older, hopefully we get wiser. And
Mhm.
yet, I don't know if it's biochemical. I don't know if it's the fact that we're aging. And so, even though we have more experiences and we have more wisdom and knowledge, there's just, I don't know, there's sort of a heaviness that sometimes comes with life at this phase, between 45 and 55, I would say. And then further interesting in that regard, this one definitely applies to the majority of my working life. But how do you feel? What can you do in life when you feel like a prisoner who can't escape? And that was one I remember looking at that question and saying, oh, I can talk a lot about that one because I have felt like that prisoner at different times in my life and for different reasons. And so it's interesting to me that that is also something that a lot of other people have struggled with.
Of course, I want to know the answers to these questions now. And I think I'll just start with the one that resonated with me a lot and the most. They all resonate. Feeling sad and down. I think it's
Mhm.
something that also, yeah, with the pain of the world, I would call it, what to do.
So I think that one comes about for different reasons for different people.
Mhm.
But for me, I noticed that there are triggers associated with it. And
Mhm.
when I was able to step back from it, because one of the things I talk about a lot in the different answers to the different questions is doing your best to be an observer as well as a participant in life. And
Mhm.
so it's a very interesting little exercise. You can do it quite simply. You can take a piece of paper and write your name. And as you're writing your name, notice yourself writing your name. And that alone is a fascinating aha moment because you realize, oh, I'm not just the physical entity that's busy writing my name. There's actually a secondary presence. That is me, my awareness, my soul, my spirit that has the ability to see my physical body doing stuff. And so right then you realize there's actually a separation, connection for sure, but there's actually two things going on. And oh, that's really interesting because then if I have this ability to watch the way in which I'm functioning in life, now I'm not just reacting to everything that comes my way, but I can actually be the observer as well as the participant. And so, in that role as the observer, I tried to look at my own life and say, well, what is it that causes these types of reactions in me? And there was one primary one, and that was that two actually primary ones, but one more dominant than the other. And I believe at my core, I'm an adventurer. And so when I feel like I'm living the same story again and again and again, that is when I start to feel down and depressed. And it's tied to the second thing, which is I have this irrational fear that I'm going to run out of time. And I do view life from a big picture perspective. I don't think you just get one shot at the human experience. I do think we're something before we're born. And so rationally, Vera, that makes no sense. Oh, I'm going to run out of time. Well, I may run out of time in this life, but I'm not going to run out of time because like time goes on forever. But it is something that I recognize as a pattern in myself. And so when these two worlds intersect each other, that is when I feel the heaviness and the sadness. And so there are simple things that I have found for myself that help me get beyond this. And one of them is simply making sure that there is something on my life calendar every single week that is me being an adventurer. And it could be as simple as, okay, today I'm going to go out in my kayak, or I'm going to go on a hike that I've never been on this particular place before. But it's interesting in life, if we don't put those things on our calendar can fill with everything else. And so sometimes it's a very small tactical decision like that that ties into who you know in your heart you are, and then actively making sure that it's part of your life. And I know we're both parents, and I think one of the other things that can be a part of this is you 100% love your kids and you want to spend time with them and do things with them. I think it's also important to honor the other piece of you, which is you who's not a parent. And so whether that means that when they're in a kid's play group, for example, that's the hour that you go do something adventurous instead of doing the laundry, cleaning the kitchen, taking care of those 25 emails that just came into your inbox. Because otherwise, I think we fall into the role of always being something for someone else. And we love that role, but we can do it so much that we lose connection to who we are. And that's kind of when that heaviness starts to come into play. I don't know. What about for you? I mean, what you said, that was a question that resonated for you. What does it feel like for you when you're in that state? And do you know what it is that brings it about?
Yeah, I think it's usually I'm very good at this, but for me, I'm very positive and I'm very hopeful. But recently, I mean, I made the decision I will not give anyone the power to make me lose hope. So
That's
that's
beautiful.
something I'm very committed to. And at the same time, it's a constant work for me at the moment. And it's not something I have resolved as yet. And I think it's also, being in a life, I think there's this study that every 7 years we just everything gets reorganized, and I think I'm
Renew,
there.
yeah.
But I'm not through it, so for me it's I cannot observe this phase of my life as yet because I feel like I'm in the middle of this tornado-ish thingy. And yeah, but it helps a lot to zoom out, and for me it's connection to zoom out with other people to get the
Mm,
focus. And what I was thinking is it's so interesting for you to have such clarity on I want to be or I am an adventurer. That's because it's a picture, it's something so tangible. It sounds so clear. And
hmm
also from the questions from the community, I got a lot of questions around how do I make time for what really matters, and also how do I find what's really important. And for you, it's one element is this adventurer, and it's a clear picture. So how did you get this clarity? Did it just come to you, or how did you find it?
It took me a long time to define it, but I've
Mhm.
known since I was a kid for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to see what was around the next corner. One of my great experiences when we used to go up to this little place, it was a very small community, and we had this little cottage that we would go to on vacation. And we had these horrible, rusted out bicycles that we bought at a garage sale. But my parents were very flexible, and they're like, go wander, like go explore. And so even at a very young age, 7, 8, it was kind of like get on these bikes and go explore and see what's around that next corner. And there were some ponds and some little rivers, and you could just go find tadpoles and you could go walk in the woods. And it was just a really good opportunity to have that sense of being an explorer. And
Mhm.
of course, it's a little microcosm, but then the world is a big place to explore. There's great adventures to be had everywhere. And so then as I got older and finally in my late 20s, allowed myself to really tap into that piece of me. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, that's a big something that I've just learned over time as I've been honest and authentic with myself about what makes me tick, what makes me happy, what brings a smile to my face. And I think there's other small things we can do for sure that help us in these moments. We live at a very unprecedented time to be grateful. I've been listening to some very interesting historical biographies lately. And when you truly get into what life was like 500 years ago, even 200 years ago, it's incredible how lucky we are. I mean, you walk into the shower in the morning, you turn on the water to the left side, and you get hot water spraying from this thing on demand. I mean, that has never happened for 99.99% of human history. And we don't even question it anymore. We don't even think about it. And then you go to bed on a mattress that is more luxurious than the kings used to sleep in. And like almost everyone has that today. And so in food too, you go into a grocery store, and I was just in Germany on tour for the book. So I know the grocery stores there, just like here. Honestly, Vera, you walk into a grocery store, it would take you 5 lifetimes to try all the different things on all the different shelves in all the different grocery stores. that has never existed in human history like it does now. And so it's very easy to be grateful if we allow ourselves to step back and think of all the reasons that we should be smiling every single day. And that's what I do, to your point about not letting the world or the situation in the world bring me down. I try and step back into that and say, like, I got nothing but gratitude for this moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. And at the same time, talking about kids, and exposure, we as grown-ups have as well. All of a sudden, every conflict, anything that's happening, social media just brought a whole different twist to our lives.
Hmm.
That has definitely also some upsides, but mainly downsides. So that's very, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic. Also, I read this book, The Anxious Generation. You might have heard of Jonathan Haidt, I think is his name, about
Okay.
what social media or cell phone exposure to digital devices makes to kids, and also how important free play is. How
Hmm.
important it is to also be able to get into danger to a certain extent, and how playgrounds are like super safe and kids
Yeah.
need to develop. We need to,
Right.
we need to. And when you were talking about you were riding your bike and the parents let everyone just go and do their thing, I think it's also, yeah, it can feel very tight. You were talking about being a prisoner, and I think there are like new sort of prisons that we don't even see, or we don't even dismantle for us as grown-ups, also as prisons that we just allow into our lives. So maybe we get over to this second question that you asked yourself.
Well, and I think and so the question that came up on tour was why? Like
Yeah.
what is going on in the human evolution that would bring this as our new reality? Because you're 100% correct that the opportunities to be distracted and to find yourself surrounded by content which is depressing is like
Mhm.
unprecedented. Now,
Yeah.
the opposite exists also. The opportunity to find yourself with content that makes you laugh or that inspires you or that gives you hope is also unprecedented. So then at the end of the day, it comes down to where we spend our time. And so my
Mhm.
guess is that if we truly are in an algorithm, uh, that this whole experience that we're going through is a bit of a game, then as humanity got better in the field of self-development, which has happened over the last 30 years compared to what it is now, it's incredible. Like I remember walking into my very first bookstore that had any books on self-development, and we were laughing on this. It used to be people were like kind of embarrassed to go to the self-development section or the self-help section of a bookstore. It's like, well, what's wrong with you? Why do you need this? And of course, there was nothing wrong with anyone. It's just we were trying to figure out the game of life. But now there are countless podcasts that you can tap into for this knowledge. Self-development has risen to mainstream where that is the goal of life, is to keep a balanced perspective. And so that's awesome. But if you think of this as a giant game, then the game said, ooh, all right, so they've got all of these resources. So what can I do to still make life challenging? I know, we'll create social media. That'll be a real way to challenge the system. And the takeaway for me is that if we're not careful, then social media and just the access to information becomes all the things that we fear, all the things that can bring us down. And I'll give you a very specific example. If one of your great concerns as a human is deforestation of the Amazon rainforest, for example, then don't look at countless videos about how much the forest is being deforested, like how much is being cut down. Instead, find content about who is replanting the forest or who is saving the forest, because there's just as much of that out there as well. And so it's not about ignoring the topic or ignoring the issue. It's about finding where people are making a positive contribution towards the issue and letting that be the feed, because that's what gives you hope. And that's what inspires you to find ways for you to contribute on the topics that matter to you as well.
I think that's very powerful to have that in mind and see it also as a sort of balance, because it can feel, for me, it can feel a bit shameful to when once it starts to feel like I'm ignoring. I have the privilege to look away from certain things because I'm not living in the rainforest, or my existence does not depend on it, at least not for now. And so I really like this kind of framing for myself, not to, because once I focus on something that is helping, I am also tackling what's the problem, and it's not that I'm ignoring it, no? And I think the challenge, and that's actually something where we have a lot of access to information like never before, to find these people and the places where we can actually make a contribution and get back into the driver's seat of somehow changing something. And I think that's very, very important. It's a leadership task as well. Where do we
Very
want to
much
go?
so.
Not always talking about where we don't want to go.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah. And it's just a question of behavioral traits. And so until you know, you don't know. And this was one of the ahas for me as I was writing on this particular question and looking for, because the whole goal with this answering the questions of people in the book is to give them very specific tactical things they can do to help them overcome these obstacles as it relates to the question. And so this was one that, as I was reflecting on it, I thought, yeah, there's only so many minutes in the day. And so if the topic matters to me, let me allocate my energy towards the solution based piece of the topic. And a very simple example of that can be, and this is something that you see all the time in society, when someone is talking about the topic, continuing to use the example of the rainforest. So you and I sit down at lunch and you're like, oh, what have you been working on? I could spend 30 minutes telling you about how horrible the deforestation is in the rainforest. Or I could tell you, one of the topics that really I'm concerned about is deforestation in the Amazon. And I've discovered 3 organizations doing amazing things to help make sure that doesn't happen. Let me tell you about what's going on there. And so where I allocate my energy to even tell one person can be shifted towards the positive associated with it. We all have a platform, whether it is a one-on-one conversation with someone, whether it is a review of a book that we're doing, whether it is posting a comment on an article that was written, or whether it's something on a much bigger platform. We all have the chance to make a positive contribution towards the things that we feel are important. And that to me was the big aha from this particular question. I allocate my time, energy, resources towards the solutions, not the people creating the problems.
You were also talking about being afraid. And one of the questions I brought was if you've ever been afraid to not have the answers anymore. Because it seems like you have an answer to
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
it's
I mean, don't get me wrong. There's about 100 million things that you could ask me where I don't have an answer because it's out of my area of expertise. On the topic of doing my very best to live an extraordinary life, it's something that I think about all the time. Related to that, and maybe even bigger, is the first question in Das Café am Rande der Welt. Why am I here? Like, what is the point of the human experience? Is something that I reflect on and think about for a lot of my minutes. And I have been thinking about for many, many years. And so, again, plenty of things that I know nothing about that I would not have an answer to. But on these types of topics, I find that if I allow myself to step back from it for a second, tap into my intuition, reflect on my life experiences, I usually have a perspective. I'm not saying that the answer that I give is the answer or the right answer for everyone. Very few things in life have just one right answer. But I always say to people that while it may not be the right answer for everyone, I can guarantee you that if I offer it up, it's something that I've thought about a lot. And
mm-hmm.
that is my goal. But it's funny, when I was doing the tour, I can't remember which tour stop, but when we were doing the tour, one of the questions from the audience was related to that. They said, do you ever doubt what you write? And my answer was instantly no, I don't, because
Mm-hmm.
I do my very best to tap into my own intuition. And sometimes the answers are coming so much faster than it's anything that I can think about that I know it's coming from somewhere else. And so I would not put something out there unless I genuinely, truly believed it. But when I get a strong intuitive flash about something and I compare it to my life experiences and see the supporting connections, I just believe that it's true. Again, I'm not saying it's true for every single person on the planet, but based on my life experiences, it's definitely true. Now, if you asked me how to solve, I don't know, a solar problem with a unit that is a
Yeah.
converter from DC to AC, and it's in an environment with only 30% solar exposure, Vera, we would not have a lot to talk about there because I have no idea on stuff like that.
Is there a misconception about your books, your work, you maybe?
In what way?
In any way, I mean, because there's always a way to interpret words, and people who maybe not dive in very deeply, but still have a picture. You probably don't care about it, but still, because you're so reflected and
I think anytime someone throws a dagger and it hits you, it's going to hurt. And
yeah,
so the question is very much tied to what we were talking about with the social issues or world issues. How much time do you allocate to the people who don't like what you do?
yeah,
And how much time do you allocate to the people who do like what you do? And so when I have the chance to interact with fans, which I just did in these different cities, as we were launching Set for Frog, and I can't tell you the number of beautiful fan interactions I had where someone would come up and they would say, "Thank you so much. Like this book has changed my life." And I would say, "Well, what? You know, what happened? What did you change? What did you?" And they would say, "Oh, I changed my job. I was at this job or I had this horrible boss. I didn't like the job. And something in the cafe story gave me the courage to make that change," or in the Big Five for Life book. Or they say, "I made a change in my relationship. It just wasn't working out." You know, it was to use the vernacular I talk about in the relationship question in this new book. It was a 6 out of 10. And I knew it was a 6 out of 10. And I knew I was worthy of at least an 8 out of 10. And something in the context of the stories gave me the courage to make the decision that I'm worthy of an 8 out of 10 or more. And so it was change my job, change my relationships. A lot of people change where they live. You know, that's a fascinating one. We often are born in an environment of the world that is not of our choosing, for sure. And then if we're not careful, we just think, oh, this is where I came from. This is where I stay. But it's a whole big world out there. And some of my favorite stories were the ones who said, yeah, I changed where I lived and I'm just so much happier now. And interestingly, Vera, it's some people say they moved from a small village to a city and that's what made them happy. And some people do the exact opposite. They were born in a city, but they love nature. And so they go in the direction of a smaller place near the ocean or near the forest. And that's what made them happy. But the key variable is they chose what was in alignment with them. And
mhm,
so, yeah, I absolutely love that stuff. And so I'm 100% sure that there is about 5% of the population that is vocal about not liking whatever you do, no matter if you're a chef, an architect, a podcast host, a television personality, a movie star. There's going to be 5% of the people that are vehemently opposed to the way in which you do whatever you do. And you know what? I would say the vast majority of the times it has actually nothing to do with you. It has to do with them and their own issues. And so you can kind of see it in the way that people comment or what they say. And you can get a glimpse into what their issue is. You know, so if someone says, "Oh, I bought this book and it wasn't worth the money," and it's like a €9 book, you're like, okay, so their issue is self-worth. You can see instantly in the way they frame the question or they frame their comment. And if they make a comment about the simplicity of the content, and they use words that are very like, you know, pedantic and other words that nobody uses in their everyday language, you can see that this person has a desire to have a contribution to society and they feel they've got something to offer, but they probably lack the self-confidence and the courage to put that offering out into the world. And so instead they look at other stuff that has been successful and they mock it or they criticize it or they criticize people who enjoy it in the hopes that it makes them feel better about themselves. So on a good day, I am 100% focused on the 95% of people who are happy and excited and enjoy the type of stuff that we create. On a great day, I not only do that, but I can look with tremendous empathy on the 5% who are throwing toxic energy into the world. On a not so great day, I look at it and I'm like, I wish they would just shut up. But I do my best to just focus on the 95% and not worry about that other part. But it is weird. The more successful you become in life, no matter what your chosen field, the bigger target you get on your back, for sure.
yeah, no, and I think that's something that's holding a lot of people back.
Yeah. Yeah, probably. But I will say that, I mean, I'll give you a very specific example. When we were in Frankfurt at the book fair, there was a young woman who came up. She was probably 20, 21. And I won't tell the entire story out of respect for her personal privacy. But this was a kid who shared with me that she was going to commit suicide. She was going to take her own life. And she chose to not do that because she found something in the cafe story at just the right time, at just the right moment when she was going to end her existence. And so when I meet someone like that and I think, oh my gosh, at 20, you have so much ahead of you. You have so many amazing adventures. You have so much personal growth that you're going to experience. you're going to learn to tell the haters, just shut up, and you're going to focus on the things that matter to you. And that life is a great adventure. And these are people that enter our life story to challenge us, but not to hold us back. There's just so many things I wanted to share with this kid. At the end of the day, if part of my role is to take the toxic energy from the 5% so that they don't direct it at someone like that, I'm happy to take that role. Very happy to take that role. So I'd rather have a much bigger target on my back than let somebody shoot arrows at that kid at just 20 years age. 100%.
That's a very nice way to look at it. And I think, I think it's a great contribution that your work has. It reaches so many people. And I think there's a lot of competencies you can learn from it. And you were also talking about, tactical things you can do. And I think, I was just recently working on some paper, and I was looking into the role of education and democracies. And I mean, the lack of competencies that we, at least here in Germany, are able, because of resources lacking, not because of there are great people working in the education system, very determined, but there's, with social media and the challenges that we're facing and the lack of resources, it is so important that young people, but also grown-ups, we need competencies to, as a collective, get along well, and that we could get along so much better if we had more competence. So I just want to express that, because that's also, it's very different what I do and like where I go and what I do. But for me, it's so much purpose I get from just bringing that out in the world, because I see all the pain that's coming from it and those stories. It's
This
great
goes
to
back
hear.
to what we were talking about before. We all have an opportunity to leverage our personal platform, whatever that is, whether it's one-on-one conversation or a group text or a much bigger platform. And a small act of kindness goes a long way towards creating the belief that we are a kind society and we have the capacity to do that. Because you're right. If we're not careful, we start to believe the filter that is being shown at us or the lens through which the world is being projected. And because of our easy access to technology, when we were growing up, you would hear about what was going on in your community. And even that you only got in short little bursts. Like the newspaper only came out once a day, and the news was only on so many times a day. And so it was relatively easy to turn all of that off if you wanted to, or not be exposed to that. Now it's such a different experience. There is not only the world news that is 24/7 being thrown at you from 100 different media outlets, it's also the world news. And so you learn about horrible things that are happening literally everywhere on the planet. And so, again, not to suggest that our role in life is just turn the volume down on all of that, but I think it's about turning the volume up on the things that matter to us and turning the volume off or down on the ones that we just are not going to spend our time on. And this is a very interesting little personal dilemma, but I've thought about this one long and hard, and this is truly my best perspective on it. Again, not saying it works for anyone but me, but this is what I've come to. If I'm not going to allocate energy, time, financial resources towards something, then it's better to just stop paying attention to it. Because I have a certain amount of time, I have a certain amount of resources that I can allocate. And so let's say I'm even spending an hour reading about or getting frustrated with something that in truth, I'm not going to do something about. I'm just going to let it frustrate me. Then better that I take that hour and allocate it towards something that I actually am going to do something about. And because you can't solve every problem. You can't fix every challenge. You can't enable every great deed. And so be selective towards the areas where you can make a difference or are going to make a difference, and leave it to somebody else to focus on the other topic. There is no shortage of ways to make a positive contribution in the world. Sadly, there is no shortage of opportunities to make a positive difference because of the challenges that exist. But again, you can't fix them all. And so what I see happening sometimes is we get so distracted with 10 topics that we genuinely care about, but we are not going to do something about all 10, that we end up doing nothing about any of the 10 other than learning about them. And I just think that's not the recipe for success long term. It just sort of drains you emotionally and mentally and physically.
Yeah, and it's also in terms of the energy that you can actually direct towards changing something is lacking. What would you say to someone who is, and I have some examples of people I know that are have a great heart, they are very competent, they have energy they want to allocate, but they work in a system, what feels like it's the system, and I know it's too much of it's a broad term, but still it can feel like there's something there are powers that are just bigger than I am, and then all of a sudden something I deeply care about, let's say for example the education system, I care about the kids, I care about the key teachers, everyone who's working in the system is just super engaged, and then but everyone just cuts my funding. That's something that's happening right now. So it's and at some places more than in others, but and then what do you do? You know?
Yeah. And so the best thing that we can do in those situations is to support the ones that are working well. And again, because of the platforms that exist in the world, there are funding, if it truly is a funding resource issue, then there are funding opportunities that never existed before. It could be a crowdfunding campaign that you're going to do. It could be creating greater awareness with people who have resources that they'd be willing to donate. Somebody taught me something super useful in terms of education. And I come from a very long line of educators going back to my grandmother, my mom, my sisters, and myself have been all involved in education in many different ways. And that is, you don't get people to change by telling them they're doing it wrong. You get people to change by building a better mousetrap. And so when people see that something is working, they're more likely to say, oh, well, I want that in my environment as well, or I want to get credit for that. People that are very power focused are more than happy to take credit for something, even if they didn't do it. But you can use that to your advantage to give them a little bit of credit, even though they weren't the reason for it, if it ends up being that the thing you care about gets the support that it deserves. And so sometimes we have to put our ego to the side. Sometimes we have to do something that we're like, okay, this is just kind of BS. Like they didn't do anything to support this. But if they actually control some degree of power, throw a little credit their way, throw a little light on it. And maybe in the long term, they somehow someday ask you, hey, just out of curiosity, I felt like I'm really happy to get the credit for that, but tell me more about that. And so maybe in the process of telling them more about that or getting them to the school and seeing it in action, maybe, just maybe, at some point they become a genuine advocate, not just an advocate on paper or an advocate when the television cameras are running. I'm not saying it's going to happen 100% of the time, but maybe. And so, yeah, it's about being creative in the game of life so that we can use the resources that are out there to make it happen. Again, people want to be part of something successful. And so the more successful it is, and the more we market and promote the success and the positive impact it's having, then the more other people are like, oh, I want to have my name associated with that. And you just kind of have to leverage that reality of the human experience with certain behavioral types.
Some people, out of the community, they also wrote me, because I think it's connected to that, because sometimes you, maybe not if we're talking about a huge system, but sometimes an organization, for example, can be just not the best environment for me. But being, quitting my job, making a big life decisions was the topic that many people mentioned, can be something that's very terrifying. So do you have some advice on how to proceed when making big decisions, life decisions, and maybe also how to tackle the fear of making a wrong decision, if there's such thing? Yeah.
Yeah, there was one specific question directly related to this in Zeit for Fragen, which was, how do I know when it's the right time to change my job, change my career, change a relationship? And I'll talk about it in a broad level. I referenced it a little bit earlier with the 6 out of 10 or 10 out of 10. Life is very fascinating in that if you look at the job that you're at or the relationship that you're in, and you were super honest with yourself, and if it's too hard to do for yourself, think about sitting in a conversation with your best friend, and your best friend says to you, okay, seriously, on a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of 10 is like the best job you ever could have imagined, what is your job for you right now? And 1 is like absolutely awful. And if you're honest with them and you say to them, "Oh, it's about a 6," then just the fact that you know that it's a 6 and not an 8 or not a 9 or not a 10 means you actually know what the 9 or a 10 would look like and feel like, because you can articulate that it's a 6. And so life is relatively short in the grand construct of things, and you deserve more than a 6. And the fact that you know that something out there is better than a 6 means you know there's options available. Now, how do you know there's something out there better? Well, maybe it's a conversation you've had with a friend or a colleague, someone who's left where they're at and has gone on to somewhere else. Or maybe you write an article about a great company or a great organization. It doesn't matter how you know that the company is out there. The question is, who is it that's out there that could give you the opportunity to add your genius in a way that's going to be better appreciated and have a bigger impact? And the truth of the matter is that if all the great, super talented people insisted on only working for great leaders, insisted on only working for great organizations, causes that mattered, positive things, we would create the all-star company of all all-star companies. This is like taking the best athletes from the best teams around the world and putting them all on the same team. This is the dream that I have, because in those situations, when you have the best of the best working towards a common cause, they are going to be so much more successful. And so whether it's a topic like children's education, or whether it is a topic like the environment, or whether it is a topic literally that is much more traditionally business focused, like running a bakery or running a car dealership, anything that is still in the realm of traditional business. If you put people who have the best of the best talents, the best of the best team making skills together, you're going to crush your competition. And so that is my dream, that the most talented people who have great interpersonal connections band together and don't allow themselves to be in a 6 out of 10, and instead create the ultimate amazing organizations that therefore provide opportunities for even more people to have a 10 out of 10 experience, both as a customer and as an employee. It's on us, though. At the end of the day, it comes down to us making the decision. I'm not willing to stay in a 6 out of 10.
And also, in terms of, for example, financial security, having a way to, having a security blanket I need, which is something that you need to be able to afford. I mean, if having kids, I think, changes a lot in your perception of what you need to have to make sure that someone else who's dependent on you is also safe. And I learned it's very subjective what people need to feel secure. And that's something that I quit my job once, and and that was something that helped me a lot to make sure to understand. The first step was to understand what I need to feel safe, or at least safe enough, to also go to the struggles that might come from freeing myself from something that might feel like a prison, or might feel like a 6 out of 10, or maybe even less. And then it can be very uncomfortable to be in situations where you don't know your way around. No one knows you. You try. I started a business in an industry I've never worked before, so that was a super risky operation. I wasn't even aware of that at the time, but I was very connected, much more than today, with myself, and did my homework in terms of the security that I need. And also, I think financial security is something that can be over how do you say, like, we can put too much emphasis on it, but also it's something that matters, no? That you
It
can pay your
does,
rent.
definitely. And we sometimes think, oh, this needs to be a dramatic shift. I need to like quit this in its entirety and focus on that. Sometimes just a small, gradual implementation can allow our brain to get comfortable with these types of changes. As an example, if you're in a job that you don't like and you're working for a boss who's a jerk, and first of all, that is not going to change. We have this perception that the people who are jerks someday have this personal epiphany and they stop being jerks and suddenly become nice. And this is based on the movie industry. It's based sometimes on storytelling in books too. But the truth of the matter is, based on my personal experience, people who are that way do not change. Maybe they change on their deathbed. I don't know. But for the most part, they've gotten where they've gotten by being who they are, and they're probably not going to change. And so if you stay in that environment, they're not going to appreciate what you bring to the table because those attributes and those skills are not what they honor. It's not what they see as important. And so the highest you can advance working for someone like that or in an organization of a lot of people like that is quite small. Your opportunities to grow are quite small. And therefore, I would say you're actually at high risk in terms of your financial security, because when cuts come, if cuts come, they're going to look at you and say, that's not someone who thinks about the world in the same way that I do. I'm happy to cut them. Right. And so for that reason alone, I think it's worth opening up the door and seeing what other options are out there. Now, you can do that in a way that's very gradual. You can just start talking to people and say, hey, what's it like where you work? And start getting a different perspective. And when you find people that would say, oh, I would say my work experience is an 8, a 9, or a 10 out of 10. Ask them what it is that makes it an 8 or a 9 out of 10, and a 10 or a 10 out of 10. Is it the management structure? Is it the freedom and flexibility that you get as an employee? Maybe you work 4 days on, 3 days off? So it could be the structure of the schedule itself. Just ask a lot of people these types of questions, and you'll start to get a glimpse into other possible realities. That's the challenge for ourselves. We think the world looks very similar in everybody else's world as it does in our world, and it's so not true. There are people who have 4 3s. They literally have 3 days off every single week. And different companies in different parts of the world have moved to that. And so that might be something super simple. Or there's people that have flexible work hours. So drop your kid off at school and then show up at 9:30, and then work till 3, pick up your child, and then do the other 2 hours at home. Like, there's lots of different options, but only if we ask those questions and see what's out there. And then associated with that, I just think it's a really good idea to know what your market value is. And so that's just putting your resume out there and starting to talk to people. That gives you the courage to realize that you're not a prisoner in this other company. You actually have options. But unless you put the resume out there, unless you're actually having these conversations, you don't feel like you have options. Mm-hmm. And it's bizarre, Vera. I've seen people at all levels have this same sense of, I'm not sure I could actually go somewhere else. Even people that are at the top levels. And then they put the word out there, and all of a sudden people are like, oh, wait, you're available? Like, and so then they start to lose this fear. I think the experience you shared of quitting your job, that also is a miraculously beautiful thing. Once you've done something once, doing it a second time is always easier. And so having quit your job and landed on your feet and landed even better than what you were leaving can be a wonderful sense of confidence for anybody.
Yeah, I can that's what I experience. I also experienced a lot of people putting all their fears on me, having to deal with all the fears people have about my life. I was like, that's interesting.
Isn't that interesting too? Right. Yeah. Parents, friends, family, colleagues, coworkers, basically what they're doing is they're taking the fears that they have about life and assigning them to your story, which is just...
yeah. And you're like, I have to deal with that as well. I didn't know. No one told me. So
yeah. But for those who are courageous, then when you actually go through it, you give everybody else who had those fears and maybe still carries those fears to some degree, you give them hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But I like it a lot to think about, also in terms of risk assessment. If you are able also to just maybe step back a little bit back from it and not just do it from a fear-based perspective, but also more from a neutral observing place. It's very interesting to make a risk assessment of the state that you're in right now. And I think that's also interesting for relationships, where of course it is about feelings and stuff, but it's also something that you can observe and look at it. And we are always thinking that the status quo is something that is stable and just per default something that is right. Whereas once you make a comparison to what you actually want to, where you want to be and how you want to feel and what you're longing for, it can look very differently.
Yeah, and that's why I like
while having gratitude for what is there, no? That's of course.
Yeah, and I think that's a great extension of it. Being grateful for what you have first. I love that perspective. And then playing the fast forward game. So that's a concept that I introduced in Übrigens Cafe. I'm writing about the 4th book in the Cafe series, where you're actually taking this moment or this piece of your life. And you're saying, if I project this forward, so if I stay at this job or I stay in this relationship and it doesn't really change in terms of my happiness level, in terms of my feeling content, in terms of my feeling like I'm growing or contributing, whatever are the key variables for you. So you take this situation and you say, okay, so let me project myself a year. Let me project myself 5 years. How am I going to feel if the storyline keeps going in this direction? And that's sometimes the great catalyst for change, because we feel that time is going to stretch on forever. But then for some reason, when you take your age and you're like, okay, so I'm 40 now. And so in 5 years or 10 years, I'm still doing this thing. Oh my gosh, I'll be 50, right? Somehow, some way that puts the experience in a different perspective, and sometimes can be the catalyst to give us more courage than we might have otherwise.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to change. If you don't make it change, it's not going to change. That's the big aha moment for so many pieces of my own life story. If nothing changes, nothing changes. The one who has to drive the change is me.
Yeah.
As nice as it would be if someone else said, hey, I see you at your job every day. I see you so immensely talented, and they just don't appreciate you. And so I'm going to be the one who helps you get it. Like, it would be awesome if someone was the fairy godmother who did that for us. But the truth is that while that may happen 1% of the time, if you're at a job that you don't like, or in a relationship that you don't like, or spending your time in ways that you don't like, it is highly unlikely someone is going to see through that unhappiness and see the gem inside, the genius inside, and be that catalyst for carrying you over the threshold to give you this new opportunity. Far, far more likely is we have to respect that piece of ourselves and be the one who takes the action to make the changes for ourselves. You'll get help along the way when you start making the changes. The initial driver, in almost all cases, has to come from you.
And it also helps to be practice in doing that, because sometimes we are confronted with decisions other people make. They break up with us, they quit, they we lose our jobs because someone else makes the decision. And that can be very much affecting our status quo. Coming back to your assessment, I mean, that can be, and then I make the experience also as having my own business. I'm confronted with decisions other people make all the time, and I'm just like, okay. And it feels very good to be very connected to all the influence I have, while still having to deal with a lot of stuff I didn't choose. So I feel like this is a good balance to be practiced, and feeling the own influence, to not feel overwhelmed by everything that other people are thinking and doing and deciding.
And this goes actually to the question that we were talking about before. How can you be more courageous and less afraid?
Yeah.
Having stories from your own past. So two things come to mind immediately for this. One is, again, the more we're feeding our system, and by system, I mean our energy system, our brain system, the more we're feeding it stories of success, people who have overcome challenges, people who have demonstrated courage in the face of uncertainty, then the more our personal brain has a database of knowledge of where this is possible. And that's really important, because if you read biographies, and they can be short biographies of women entrepreneurs, and you are a woman entrepreneur, then at some point when you encounter something, you've probably got some case examples in those stories that tell you, oh, I'm not the only person who's ever dealt with this. That's reassuring to know that you're not alone. And so that's A. B, they actually dealt with it in this way. So you've got some tactics or techniques that you may learn from these stories. And C, you see where they arrived on the other side of the situation. And that helps our brain realize, oh, it's not going to last forever. There's actually a place where this ends, and then a new thing begins. So that can be super useful. And I love that technique. And a challenge or an obstacle that I see people sometimes succumb to is they think, oh, I'm a female entrepreneur and I live in Hamburg, and therefore I'm only going to look for examples of female entrepreneurs who live in Hamburg. In my experience, the more you open up the field of potential inspiration, the better. And that is expanding your scope to be any gender, expanding your scope to be any place on the world, any ethnicity, any different element of society. And if you really want to take it to the next level, expand it to be all of life. And so there is inspiration to be found in the actions of animals, in the actions of insects. You can really look at the way in which a butterfly enters the cocoon state, not knowing what's going to happen because it's leaving the caterpillar state. And for some reason that it doesn't even know, it's entering this thing and it's going to sit in there. And then its entire body is going to dissolve and reform. And it's got to just believe in the system. But then it comes out at a certain point and it can actually fly, but it doesn't know how to fly because there's no training mechanism for that. But it figures it out. And somehow, even knowing that, the simple story of the life cycle of a caterpillar and a butterfly can be incredibly inspiring to giving us the courage when we need it. So that's a very specific technique. The other one that I would recommend is looking back at your own personal life story and saying, where have I been courageous? Where have I faced my fears before and walked out on the other side of that in a better place? Because sometimes we take those things for granted in our own stories. We don't give ourselves enough credit. And so it's one of the tips that I highly, highly recommend to people is having a little bit of a personal biography of where you've done stuff like that. And then going back to it and reflecting on it and what gave you the courage in those situations to take action. What type of steps did you take that worked out successfully? Did you tap your network in a good sort of way? Did you ask for help where right now you're afraid to ask for help? The tools that you used may not have been the best tools, but they were somewhat successful. And so pick the patterns of success that you've had, reinforce for yourself that you are capable, that you've been down this road before. And that can be a great tool towards helping us address a particular challenge that we're facing now.
Thank you. That's for sharing. I think that's it's very helpful and it's also a very specific way to take ownership and start somewhere. Yeah, or continue doing things and reflecting and centering yourself.
And by the way, for anyone who's a parent out there,
yeah,
this is the perfect example. You arrived home with the hospital with another life form, with no instruction manual, no guidebook.
It's
And
so
they were
crazy.
like, okay, you've been in the hospital for 3 to 5 days. You'll figure it out. And now you're responsible for another life who is completely helpless. I mean, completely helpless. This little kid can't walk to the refrigerator and feed themselves. They can't even turn over. They can't anything. And yet you figured out how to make that little baby not just content from a basic needs of food and shelter, but you gave love to that child. You made them feel safe and secure and that they were part of something that was important. They were part of a family. And so any parent who has succeeded in doing that to help a kid realize that they are wanted and they're important, you've already demonstrated tremendous courage in the face of maximum uncertainty. And so add that one to your life story of where you succeeded in the face of, I don't know what I'm doing, and it worked out okay.
I have 3 quick questions to finish up, but maybe one more last question before we do the 3 under 3, okay?
Okay.
So, because when you look at the state of the world or just look at the big picture, I mean, you're traveling, you're talking to a lot of people, you're getting, I guess, a lot of messages. And what do you think do we need as humans? Do we need more than ever? If you had a cure or something to give to all of us, what would it be?
It would be trust your intuition. We have this internal guidance system.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked about this. I think I first introduced it in the discussions in the cafe books in the second book in the cafe series when Casey and Jessica are speaking. And we have this internal guidance system that is wired into our physical form and the essence of us that is watching and observing our physical form. And all of us, I've never met a single person who couldn't give me an example of where they've felt this. It could even be as simple as like you're walking out of the house and you know you're forgetting something, but you can't remember what you're forgetting. That's like the very baseline example that I think we all can connect to. But there, in all likelihood, have been many other moments where you had a sense, a knowingness that the road on the left was the one to take, not the one on the right, even though rationally the one on the right may have been the one that made more sense. And when you have followed these intuitive flashes and taken that road on the left, even though it didn't make sense rationally, it is always proven to be the right choice. And when you have overridden it and taken the one that was the more rational one, it is always proven to be the one that you should have taken the one on the left. And so the more times we honor that, the more we build fluency with whatever this guiding source is. I wish I could tell you, Vera, that I know exactly what it is. I really do not. I have feelings and thoughts and ideas around it, but the truth is we don't need to know exactly how something works in order to use it. I constantly reference my smartphone as an example of that. I can't tell you the way that thing works. Like, I know there's satellites and there's data packets and routers, and I get the essence of it, but I can't tell you exactly how my phone works, or my car for that matter, but I still use them. And the reason that I use them is because they work. And the same goes with this deep intuitive connection that we have. The more we use it on the small things, the more we get guidance on the big things. And it's almost like the system is testing our fluency, or whether we're listening or not. And so the more we demonstrate, yes, I'm listening. Yes, I understand what you're saying. And yes, I'm willing to act in alignment with this proven track record of following my intuition, then the more guidance we get on the bigger and bigger and bigger things. And the toughest, I think, is when we can't quite tell which way to go. Like, we're trying to tap into that intuitive sense, but it's still a moment where it could be right, it could be left. We just don't know for sure. And maybe that's a growth moment. Maybe that's one where we just need to experience something. I don't know. But I can say that the more you tap into that for your decision making, the less fear you have, because you realize you're not alone. There is whatever this other essence is. Maybe it's you and all your previous past lives and all the experiences of that. Maybe it's a soul cluster of you and 50 other souls that are at your resource. I have no idea exactly what it is. But I know in my own personal experience that when I listen to that and I make decisions in alignment with that, it always turns out to be a better decision. And so again, that helps eliminate the fear, because the fear is, what if I make a mistake? Right? Well, what if you were able to tap into something, an essence of spirit and energy, or the true essence of you, I don't know, that minimizes the chances that you'll make a mistake? Wouldn't that be an easy to implement choice to tap into this? And we all have the opportunity to do that. And sadly, as I reference in the second cafe book, we don't, for the most part, get a tutorial on using this. It's a little bit like having a child where they don't give you a guidebook. Same with your intuition. It doesn't come with a tutorial. And a lot of people don't know it's there, and they don't turn the on switch on. And so that's the great danger, and what I wish I could help everybody realize. And maybe, wow, this is like a really big thought, but maybe when you think of so many of the decisions that people in a destructive high level are making, they're making them out of fear. It's a sense of insecurity. It's a sense of, I'm not worthy. It's a sense that my contributions will be forgotten over time. And maybe if they had this intuitive connection, they'd realize, like, all of that is irrelevant. That's not the whole point of life. And so, yeah, that'd be pretty awesome, actually, if all of that disappeared because people got connected.
It would be so. And for me, it's so obvious. That's the thing. I'm just like, come on, people.
Yeah.
This would change the world if we just reflect and connect.
Yeah. Well, and all we can do is do our very best to be a presence of positivity, an example of where it does work. And again, I don't think you're going to ever change the whole world, but if you can change the perspective of one person, they have the chance to change the perspective of one person, and then another one, and then another one. And so by being authentic and doing our best to be an example of where this is worth doing, not just for ourselves, but because of the betterment overall, then that's the best chance we have of making a bigger global presence difference.
Beautiful. I like that a lot. Yeah.
Maybe in spirit with that, I'll add one more thing. And this goes to the courage piece. I think this is something that I personally am challenged with. And so I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I think sometimes we are afraid to take it to the next level. So we have a platform of some sort, and it's at level 3. And the truth is, we know there are people out there at level 10 or level 100, but we ourselves are saying, am I actually okay with 3? You know, and there's nothing wrong with being at 3. There's nothing wrong with being at 1. If you're happy to just have your contribution be an occasional one-on-one conversation where you try and make a positive difference, that's beautiful. That's enough all by itself. At the same time, if you know that you have the capacity to be on a bigger stage of life in terms of making a difference, whether it's because your company has 10 people and you realize you could actually grow it to 100,
Mm-hmm.
that changed 90 other, not just those lives, but the lives of their family and the lives of the people they interacted with. I think it's one of those where it's a perpetual discussion in my head of like, do I want to level up to the next thing? And what does that look like? And do I have the courage to do that? Or am I actually quite content with where I'm at? And this is sufficient.
Yeah, I I can very much, yeah, it resonates with me because I think it also depends on what's the kind of work I want to do and how what makes impact. You know, what brings pleasure, what are my strengths, and what and how do I organize all these things and the next level, and does it bring with itself that I myself might find myself in a totally different job role that I might not be content with, that I might not be as impactful with what I can actually do. So
And what
it
do I
and
need to sacrifice to get there? That's the other thing is
also, yeah,
as a
yeah,
someone who and my daughter's 17 now, so I'm sort of at the end of the experience where I get to see her every day. She's going off to university soon. And when
hmm,
she was little, it was really, really important to me that I got to spend as much time with her as possible every single day. And
yeah,
the truth of the matter is there's only 24 hours in the day and something's got to give. If you're going
yeah,
to take on a role with managing 100 people instead of 10, it's probably, unless you can structure it in a way that doesn't require any more of your time or energy, which is a really creative question to ask ourselves,
hmm,
then I think it's really critical that we allow ourselves to be super honest with ourselves in those situations and say, what is the most important thing to me? And just honor that. And if it is at this moment in my life, I really want to have more time to be dedicated towards this cause or this child or this family member or even yourself, that is 100% perfect. And don't feel like you need to sacrifice that for something else. So that's the
yeah,
authenticity part.
yeah. And I think fantasy plays a big role in it because can I imagine something for me, for example, it would be a big question of how much pressure would I feel within a certain role or with a certain responsibility. You know, having a team already for me is something that changed my perspective on responsibility and the things, you know, I need to get, like, it's very important. Sales, I spend so much time around sales because it's just important. Cash flow, I don't know. So and what I make of it, you know, how do I find a way to deal with it that doesn't put pressure on me, which affects not only
Hmm.
the time, but also the quality that I get to spend in different areas in my life, because it can sneak into your life and it can just absorb you. And even if it's a lot of fun, you know, it feels like a weight. And I think we have so many examples of people who carry all this weight, and it needs imagination to see how we can look at responsibilities, be accountable, but also, you know, find a smart way to organize and find a way for ourselves how we frame and carry certain things without them being a pressure or a weight, but actually something that lifts us up and really. And I think this is when the exceptional people who build exceptional things, who had exceptional lives. I think I don't know. There are not so many, but but I think these people are out there, and you were talking about finding them, and yeah. So I think there's so much in the vision and the fantasy to you know, to intentionally create a different vision that, and it's very hard if it has not been there or you have hardly been exposed to anyone who's ever done that before. Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah, that's just when you were describing that, I was thinking about that. Imagine how much easier it would be to level up from that 10 to 100 if you had the opportunity to talk to someone who's already at 100, or
yeah,
maybe even someone who's at 1,000 who went from 10 to 100 to 500 to 1,000. And
yeah,
so finding people that have already walked that path that you want to walk and having genuine conversations with them where possible, or at least learning their stories, their interviews or biographies or something else, definitely gives us insight, which helps us overcome the challenges or helps us structure things in a way that still fits the rest of our needs. One of the things that came to mind as you were talking about that, and I'll sort of close with this before I take your final three questions, is a concept that I this is another piece of something I wrote about in Insight for Froggen, which is know your numbers. And so if you say to yourself, a happy life, a fulfilled life, a genuine life for me is reading with my child every night for an hour before they go to bed, or going to 3 of their football games over the course of a month, or taking them on 2 vacations per year where we get to see animals in the wild in a different country. Whatever your numbers are, take the time to reflect on that and write that down and say, this is what happiness is for me. This is what success is for me as a parent, as a leader, as whatever role you're playing in these different parts, and be very clear about these numbers. And then when you're faced with these decisions, then the best piece of advice I can give someone is honor your numbers. And for some reason, this intuition, this cosmic algorithm, which we haven't had a chance to talk about yet, but is a huge piece of the way in which I view the world. The algorithm sees you honoring these numbers as a place of importance for you and the definition of happiness and success. And when you honor that, all the resources in the world that are available seem to go in that direction. And so that's one of the best pieces of aha moments that I've had in regard to these types of topics.
That is a good transition to my 3 final questions.
Fantastic.
A quick 3 in 3. 3 in 3 minutes.
Here we go.
Okay, next. What's the worst advice that you've ever gotten?
The worst advice I've ever gotten, I would say, but that's what everybody else is doing. Like advice based on that concept.
Did you have a mentor? And if so, how and where did you find them?
I did not have a mentor through really my entire life in terms of a structured mentor system. And it's one of the big gaps for me. Yeah, I didn't grow up in that environment. It was a concept I was totally unfamiliar with. And finding mentors, whether they're people you actually get to talk with, or even if it's like we were talking about in the form of biography, is one of the best things you can possibly do. Ideally, someone who you can actually talk to.
Yeah. And last one?
By the way, and just ask. If people can't do it, they'll tell you no. But in many cases, nobody's asked.
Yeah, but it's hurtful to hear no.
I know. Yeah. But it just means at that moment, it's not a reflection on you. It's a reflection on their status and situation in life. They just don't have the bandwidth at that moment.
Yeah. What do you regret?
I regret that I didn't know a lot of the things that I've learned over time. This is a lot of the answers that I give in Insight for Froggen, these, because the whole book is based on like, what are the things I wish I would have known, that I would have had the access to when I was 18, 20, 25, that I could have implemented earlier. I think it took me about 10 to 15 years of my life to figure out a lot of things that, had I have known them, then I would have been able to launch my life in the direction that I wanted to go 10 to 15 years earlier. So my only regret is that I didn't have access to the type of stuff that I know now to be true at an earlier age.
Yeah. John, thank you so much for your time and the energy and the openness and kindness and wisdom. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your work and everything.
Oh, thank you. Always great to see you, and look forward to our paths crossing in person again next time.
Yes.
We grabbed dinner in Hamburg last time I saw you, which was so fun, and just I enjoy the conversations. I enjoy the spirit and the energy in which you walk through life. And so thank you for the contributions you make every single day. And yeah, we're in this great adventure together for sure.
Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, thank you. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with John Strelecky and that you have some takeaways for yourself. We had a lot of practical stuff in there, what to do. Maybe you will directly start on writing down some of your big biographical steps. That's something that we do in the Female Leadership Academy as well. It's a very good technique to become aware of your strength and also the confidence that you can have based on what you achieved in life and the challenges that you faced and overcame. And I can really, really recommend. And there were a lot of other practical things that I wrote down, and I will try to implement some of them as well, or find my way back on being more centered and focused in times that I find personally, when I look at world politics, for example, very challenging. And I know that there are many people listening here that feel the same way. So I hope you also take away some guidance and inspiration and some good energy, hopeful energy. I think we can all use for not only our personal careers and our personal paths, but also for the way that we connect with other human beings and we tackle the challenges that are ahead of us. Maybe someone comes to mind that really needs to hear this. If you have someone in mind right now, maybe you just directly take your cell phone or whatever you are listening to this podcast and just forward this episode to someone who needs to hear this. And I thank you for listening. We will be back next week, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Have a great week, and hear you then. All the best.